time allows at the end, we'll open the lines for any questions that may arise. Our contact details are on the slide that's in front of you at the minute. If you'd rather ask questions outside the more public forum of this call. So very briefly, Geocortex Essentials is a product that we've been distributing in the UK for about 8 or 9 months now. It's from a Canadian company called Latitude Geographics, who have been around for this industry at least quite a long time. They were founded back in 1999. Their focus is entirely on products and tools that complement Esri's ArcGIS server. There's over 800 deployments of this product that we're going to show you worldwide. And we, whilst it's true to say that in many countries such as Canada, much of the Benelux area, it's actually Esri that distribute this product. In the UK and Ireland, it's One Spatial. So before I hand over to Chris, I think the things to sort of emphasize about the product are that it's much more than a WebGIS tool that we're going to be showing you. It's all about getting more out of your use and investment in Esri's ArcGIS for Server product. And its real power is in putting application development and control into the hands of the GIS manager through a much more configuration-oriented approach to application production as opposed to programming and development. That's not to say that that's impossible with the product. And it's all geared around making the management of applications that are authored far easier, with greater reuse of what's been developed in multiple applications. There's some key elements that I'd propose that you look out for when Chris gives you the full demo today. One of these is the whole concept of the spatial application infrastructure. Chris will explain how this makes the production and subsequent management of applications and sites very easy as opposed to the more traditional way of doing it. Another is the ease and speed with which we can produce print, plot and report templates, both author them and reuse them and then subsequently manage them. And the final thing to really look out for towards the end is the discussion around the workflow capabilities of Geocortex and the ability to model business processes and produce very purpose-specific application capabilities through workflow. So I'm going to finish there. That's my brief introduction to the product and the fact that we're selling it in the UK. And if Chris is ready, I shall hand over to him. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. For the next sort of about 20 minutes, half an hour, I'll be going through a presentation and demonstration of the Geocortex technology. There's just a few slides to put some things into context that John was talking about earlier. So I guess what I really start off with is, what is Geocortex Essentials? Geocortex Essentials is essentially 3 groups of products or parts of products. There's a set of map viewers and management tools. There's some workflow technology that John's already spoken about. And there's this spatial application infrastructure, which is really the future-proofing of your products moving forward. So I'll talk about those individually. So if we talk about map viewers initially, there's a whole bunch of map viewers that you can configure and combine, and are really easy to use and to manage, and it's all managed via a tool that you'll see me using later. There are a number of different viewers you can use. You can use a Flex viewer, a JavaScript viewer, a Silverlight viewer, which is very rich and very powerful, and you'll see me using that one later. And just recently, probably about 3 months ago, an HTML5 viewer has come out. The HTML5 viewer is really aimed at the portable devices, your iPhones and your iPads, and that will continue to develop as time goes on. It's also some workflow technology. Now, John mentioned the workflow technology. This is really one of the things that sets Geocortex apart from other products that are out there. It allows you to build business processes in a simple and easy to use manner so that you can rapidly deploy new websites out to your users for, say, just reporting an incident. So you don't need to know an awful lot about what's underlying the code. You just build the workflow and then pass it out to your users, and they use it on their iPhones, their iPads, etc. But the main component is this spatial application infrastructure, and it really provides you a future-proofing approach to building multiple standard applications. Traditionally, what people do is they build one large web application, and then they share it amongst the different groups within their organization. The problem with this is the different groups probably only want a very small part of the application, but they need to learn the whole application in order to use their very small part, which means people are reluctant to use and get to know these products. The Geocortex approach is to build small, purposeful, rapidly deployable applications out to the environment. So you would have a number of applications, small, accurate and easy to use, deployed to different groups rather than one large application. And this is underpinned by, if you build one large application, you build all your viewer logic, your security, your business rules, your data connections, all into one application. And that involves an awful lot of custom code. The problem with that approach is that it's very difficult to manage and it's difficult to change. There's lots of poor reuse and redundancy of code. It's very costly to maintain or enhance or even extend. It's very rarely is it using standard off-the-shelf components, and it's very risky. People these days are leaving to get other jobs, and nominally people will write this code but not put any comments in it, so someone's going to try and pick it up and move on with it, and that proves to be very difficult to do. With the spatial application infrastructure approach, you build the majority of your websites in a standard environment using standard drag and drop tools. And only the custom code that you might put in the viewer sits on top, so you might change the viewer to suit different needs. So it's a very small amount of customization with a large amount of core foundation layer. So the benefits of this are obviously you're not tied to a specific technology. Therefore, if some other technology comes out that supersedes HTML5, you can start using that technology. Because you've got the future proving, as Esri come out with new versions of ArcGIS Server, the Geocortex Essentials product is already working with ArcGIS Server, so it just migrates seamlessly onto the next version. There's a lot of out-of-the-box functionality and a continually evolving roadmap that Latitude are building on. There's obviously ease of maintenance and support costs, and there's a lower overall startup cost, and very quickly you can install the software and get some websites out there. So this is the architecture of the environment. So sitting at the bottom level here we have ArcGIS Server, we have web mapping services, Bing, Google, etc. In the web layer we have an ArcGIS Server REST API. We also have a Geocortex Essentials REST API. Now these two APIs may work together or may work in isolation when different parts of your website are accessed. And then sitting on the top we've got the browsers. There's an ArcGIS Server Silverlight API. There's also a Geocortex Silverlight API. And these green objects here are all controlled by the Geocortex Manager, which you'll see me using in a short time. But I'd like to just go back and say a little bit more about workflow. I mean, it really is an intuitive approach that models your existing processes. It allows administrators to build these, automate everyday situations in a very easy and simple to use manner. You don't need to be a programmer in order to build these workflows, and you'll see me demonstrate a couple of these later on in a demonstration. Workflow is all built via drag and drop technology in the Workflow Designer, so you can drag and drop components into your workflow which the user doesn't see, but the workflow is described. So it might be reporting an incident where the user might click on the map. It then might pop up a box to ask them to enter some details of the incident that they've seen, and then it might pop up another box to ask them for their email address. There's lots of things going on in the background, but the user doesn't need to see them. They need to see a very simple and easy to use interface. So that's really the end of the presentation. So we'll now go ahead and have a look at Geocortex in action. So I start the Geocortex Essentials Manager here, and I log into the environment, and we get presented with a list of websites. Out of the box you get these Charlotte websites, so you can take these websites, customize them, change them and modify them to suit your needs. I've got a one spatial demo site here, so I'll go in and I'll now edit that site. So we get presented with a list of tabs down the left hand side here. Now if we remember back to the spatial application infrastructure slide, the foundation or the core of your site is basically everything from this top tab all the way down to security. And the customization bit is the last bit where we customize the viewer to sit on top of the site. So we'll just have a look at a few of these tabs here. We'll look at the map tab first because it's probably the most important part. So what's happening here is that I've added some map services to my site. I've got three of them. I've got a foreground asset layer, I've got a master map layer, and I've got some Mr. SID data. They've come from ArcGIS server, and what I've done is I've built an MXD file inside ArcMap, and then I've served that up using ArcGIS server. And for this, I'm using ArcGIS server 10.1 Service Pack 1. And you can see that Geocortex works seamlessly with that product. So in each of these layers, we have a number of data. So we've got some address point data here, some building asset data, and each of these objects we can configure. So we can say whether it's included in the legend, whether it's in the layer list, whether we can do global searches on that layer. We can also add other options to specific layers. For example, we can give it some specific details. So I could change the layer name to be buildings if I wanted to. I could give the layer an icon instead of a name. I can start adding descriptions that automatically get displayed, and I can change the color of the selectable object. So when we select it, it highlights in a different color from other layers. We can set data links to other external data sources. So it might be other external databases that you want to draw information on. And then you would key them on a primary key. You would say, connect to this database using this value from my data. We can set up reports on the data. So I've got a building report here. Again, reporting is a very powerful tool inside Geocortex, and you'll see me using that later, and I'll show you how you can configure reports. And there are feature maps which get used in reports. There's layer and feature hyperlinks, which allow you to go off and hyperlink to other layers in the data set. And then you can turn on and off attributes that the users may or may not want to see. Excuse me. Next tab down is the layer themes. Normally, when you're using data, what you want to do is you will go to the layers tab and you'll toggle on and off different options that you want to see. But what we can do is we can add in a layer theme. So I'll create a new layer theme here, and I'll call this Mr. SID and Buildings. So I add in this new layer theme, and then I can configure that layer theme. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off everything apart from the building asset layer and the Mr. SID layer here. So I can apply those changes, and then I can save my site. So that's now configured in my site, and you'll see how we use that when we go into the viewer. We then have a few other things here. We have an overview map, so you can define how your overview looks. We can ingest ArcGIS server GIS services into the site. So we can add a geocoding service, a geoprocessing service, or a geometry service that we might want to use. We can add external data connections, but this will be global rather than just on a layer specific. We can also have print templates. Again, print templates are very powerful. You can configure any size of print or plot templates, and you can configure any scale and also any resolution. So I've got one plot here. It's an A4 plot, and what I've defined is it can have PDF. I'll toggle on JPEG and PNG and GIF, so I've got some options. And then what we've got is we've got some map scales that have been defined. And these, another thing to point out, this is true scale. It's not doing any interpolation. So if you say plot at 1 to 1250, you get a 1 to 1250 scale plot, not an interpreted plot. And then we have resolutions that we can plot at. So we have low, which is 96 dots per inch, medium 200 dots per inch, high 300 dots per inch. They are my resolutions. They're what I've put in. I could change that. I could make low 300 dots per inch, and I can make high 2,000 dots per inch. So you could, if you needed or wanted to, create a 2,000 dot per inch A0 plot. It would take a little while to build, but you could do that. Then for people that are continually using the software, you can create named extents so they can go to their particular area very quickly when they start up. You can add a north arrow to your data. You can connect to external CSV tables and so on and so forth. You can add in workflows, and we're going to have a look at workflows later in the demonstration. And you can add security. By default, the websites do not have security. If you add security, there's several different types. It can be Windows authentication, it can be Active Directory, or it could be LDAP. And you can define your own inside Geocortex. So you're in full control of the security of your websites. So that, having configured our site, we then add in a viewer. You can see they've already created a viewer here. It's a Silverlight viewer. Once the viewer is created, you can just load it up and it'll load the data. So here you can see we're loading up, and this is how I want my initial layout to look. You can decide whether you want the layer menu to appear, whether you want the drop-down menus to appear, whether you want the toolbox to be appearing, and so on and so forth. But I want maximum map area when I first start. So here's my maximum map area. I've got a toolbox over here. If I expand the toolbox, you see I've got a number of different tabs here. I've got a standard move around the map type tab. I've got some point identity here. So if I click on an object here, it'll drill down at the point and it'll say what things lie underneath that point. You see that we've got a building asset there. We've got an education object there. I've turned off the ability to identify the master map objects. I'm only really interested in my foreground objects, so I get a choice of the building or the education object. If I click on the building object, it tells me the details, and then I can look at the attributes on that building. So there's some of the attributes. If there are attachments to those objects, so attachments are things that arrived in ArcGIS 10.0, and the object you've got has got attachments on it, then these would appear if they were in the data. And then you can look at those attachments. So you can ingest the attachments ability inside ArcGIS. What we also might want to do at this point is to have a look at, say, a Bing map of our area. So if I have an internet connection and I'm connected, we can bring up Bing maps of where we are and have a look at it. Or Google Maps as the same sort of thing we can do. We can also perform simple and advanced queries on the data. So there's a simple query builder here and an advanced query builder here. You can drag and drop shape files or CSV files onto the data if you've got given something that you want to look at. What we also might want to do is to do a print of our area. So I've got a print map function here. So if I click on the print map function, remember we looked at the print template that I'd loaded. So we've got the output formats here. We've got my low, medium and high, and we've got my scales that I put. So I'm going to do it for the current extent at A4. I can go create file. This builds me my PDF file. And this is what the plot looks like. So we've got a logo up here, we've got a title, an overview map, we've got a legend, we've got a scale that's automatically calculated, a scale bar that's automatically calculated, and the data on the screen. So how do we configure this plot template? Well, it's really quite simple. There is a report and plot designer, and I can open up the report template or the plot template that I've created, and you can see it there. This is very Crystal Reports-like in the way that you build these reports and plot templates. It's actually based on something called Active Reports, but it's very similar to Crystal Reports if you've ever used that. And just to show you how dynamic this is and how quickly you can modify things, if I grab my main plot area there and I click on this box here and find the word demo and change that to Friday's demo. What I can do is then save this report template away, go back to my viewer. Because the report template has changed, I can use that report template. But what I might want to do also is to mark up some objects on the map. So I might want to mark up an object here and say, check this, please. So I mark that up and then I print my map again. I can just go create file. And I get my new file. And you'll see that we've now got a smaller data area. We've got Friday's demo, and we've also got the markup object that we created on the plot. So you can see it's very simple and very easy to build these plot templates, to modify them, change them. You can add watermarks to them. You can add your own notes to them as well. The other thing we might want to do is to do some reporting on objects. And we can access reporting and plotting, for that matter, from this I want to menu. So the I want to menu is really a group of things that you might want to do on a regular basis. So I'm going to say I want to create a report. Now I know that I've got a building report which I registered earlier, as you saw, and I'm going to do a single object select. If I click on the object here, it only selects the building, and then I can download this report. Again, I can set the format, and you can see that I've got a zoomed out view, a zoomed in view, I've got a title and a logo. I've got a date here, and then I've got some data from other databases. So I've got the address coming from an address database here, and that's on my page here. So it's very simple to do. Again, the reporting is done from the report designer, so I can go back to my resources here, go into my report templates, and have a look at my portrait report. So in much the same way we designed the print template, we have a report template here with a zoomed out view, my zoomed in view, and then my database data fields here, so the thoroughfare name from my address point database. The beauty of these reports is that you can do a single select on these objects, but you can also do multi-select. So for example, if I window on these two objects here, it'll build a report with both objects in. So there's the first object, and on the next page there's the second object. So it builds these reports dynamically, so if you select a bunch of objects, you get a page for each object. So printing and reporting is very powerful within Geocortex. I'll just tidy up the markup objects there, and now what we'll have a look at is we'll have a look at the workflow technology that's inside Geocortex. Actually, before I do that, remember we configured a layer theme where we had just buildings and just Mr. Sid data. Well, that's available under this menu here, Mr. Sid and Buildings. So if I select Mr. Sid and Buildings, I get just the blue buildings on top of the Mr. Sid data. And if I go back to all layers, I go back to all layers. Whereas traditionally, probably what you'd want to do is you would go into the layer menu here, and you would go in and you would toggle on and off the different bits you want. By using this technology and the layer themes, you can build up simple layer themes that people can switch to rapidly. You also have the ability to fade in and out the data, so if you wanted to fade the foreground data, you can sort of set some fading levels there as well, the transparency of that layer. So now we'll move on to workflows. I'm going to show you two workflows today. The first one is a very simple query a building ID and find that building for me. So here's my workflow designer with my workflow in it. You can see it has a number of steps. The first thing I'm going to do is pop up a form on the screen so we can design this form. So this form has got an autocomplete box in it, and it's going to be doing a query on the database. It's then going to prompt me for a property reference. So this is what my form will look like. So I type in a property reference, and then I click on search. When I click on search, we perform a query task in the background. We select the results of that query task. We get the extent of the objects, and then we move to that extent. So it's a find the object and window to it. So that's the workflow. The first thing we need to do is we need to register the workflow with my site. So here's my site here. So I go to the Workflows tab, and I'm going to say I want to add a new workflow. We'll call the workflow Find. This is just a reference for me to use at a later point. And then I'll load that workflow file that I showed you moments earlier. So find a building by ID. I add that workflow to my site. So the workflow is now available in my site. Now I need to tell my viewers about that workflow. So I might have multiple viewers on top of one site, so I can configure what viewer sees which workflows. So much as we can configure the maps, or the way they look, the styles inside our foundation layer, we can configure the viewer in many different ways. So we can configure the look and feel of the viewer. So here I'm adding a one spatial logo with a certain theme. You can change colors, you can add whatever you want. We can also configure the I want to menu. So here's the buttons that are on the I want to menu, and I'm going to add a new menu item. I'm going to call this I want to find a building. Oops. Building by ID. And the command, I'm going to run a workflow. So I run a workflow by ID, and the ID is the name that I gave the workflow when I registered it with my site, such as Find. If you want to, you can add in logos, so you can have your own images. So I can add in a one spatial image here. And then I click on OK. The option appears at the bottom of the list, so it's at the bottom of the I want to menu. I might decide that I want it at the top of the menu, because I know people are going to use that. I then save my site, so my viewer and my site now have the workflow applied to them. So I can now fire up my viewer. And under the My I Want To menu, I now have Find a Building by ID. If I click on Find a Building by ID, it asks me for a property reference. Now I happen to know there's one on here which has got a property reference of 441. I also happen to know that this is a group of buildings, so when I do a search, what it will do is it will say I found two buildings which have got a property reference of 441, and these are the two buildings. And as normal, when I click on them, I can get the additional details and the attributes and so on and so forth. So I can query building by ID and then go to those buildings and look at the attributes, create a plot or whatever I want to do at this point. So that's a very simple, easy to use workflow. Another workflow that we developed upon requests of our users actually is one which will basically allow us to find a nearest object from a given point. So I'll just show you that workflow. So we've got this Find My Nearest generic. So when one spatial ship the Geocortex Essentials product, we will bundle these workflows as part of an add-on from one spatial. So here we're going to define some user-defined variables. So this will change on a per-user site, but the rest of the workflow will remain the same. The first thing we do is we ask somebody to click on the map, and we create a markup object. Then we get a list of the current active layers, and we present those to the user, and we ask the user to select a layer that we want to query on. Currently the workflow just works on a single layer, but it could work on multiple layers if you wanted. So, for example, you might want to find the nearest police station or fire station. So you could click on 2 layers. In this case, for the workflow, we're only clicking on a single select layer. Once we've done that, we buffer the start point, so the point where the person has clicked, we create a buffer. And again, this is a predefined buffer value here of 1,000 meters. We could pop up a question box to the user and say, how far do you want to search? So what distance do you want to query within? Having done the query, we find the nearest object. Having found the nearest object of the particular type, we then display the clicked point and that nearest object in the window. Now, in order to make this work, One Spatial had to develop some workflow activities to get the find nearest. ArcGIS Server doesn't have a find nearest function, so we built a find nearest activity which we use in the get nearest object section. So here we pass in a point and then we give back a collection of objects. So you can, if you want, develop new activities to put into your workflows to maybe do something that's not there out of the box. So what I'll do now is I'll actually load this workflow into my site. I'll give it a reference of near. I save my site, and again, as we did before, I now need to register with my viewer. So I'm going to register it on the I want to menu again. Find my nearest. Again, run a workflow by ID and the command parameter will be near. Again, I'll add in a logo. Again, it sits at the bottom and we may want to move it up to the top. And we'll apply the changes there. We'll save my site and we'll go back to our viewer and we'll load the viewer. So I want to find my nearest. So when I click on this workflow, I'm prompted to click on the map. So I'll just click on the map somewhere. And you'll see that the red dot appears. It then gives me a list of layers that I want to query against. So I want to find the nearest building asset. I click on next. It goes away, does the calculations, finds the building asset, and finds my red dot, highlights the building asset, and also selects it for me. So I can then go and look at the attributes and so on and so forth. So that's another workflow that we will deliver with the product when you purchase the product. And that really concludes my demonstration of the Geocortex Essentials product. And so what I'll do now is I'll just hand back to John to share any questions that you may have. Thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Chris, and clearly struggling with your voice there a little bit, so much appreciated. I hope that's been useful and interesting to you all on the call. Chris has obviously shown us various aspects of Geocortex. For me, I think the 5 key takeaway points from this are that the product is it's a very productive, rapid and efficient application development and configuration environment. Clearly, there's a huge amount of pre-built capability out of the box just for literally configuring on or off in an application. There is something we didn't touch on. There is actually full access for developers to the whole suite of API level interaction as well. that's kind of points 1 and 2 really. Very productive and efficient application development. Huge amount of pre-built capability out of the box. Third point really, some excellent plotting and report template authoring, management and reuse potential of templates that are produced. I think the fourth key thing really is the workflow capabilities. The workflow technology is really quite unique in this product. There's nothing else really allows you to model business processes and produce very task-specific application capabilities in quite this way. And then I think the fifth point really is a conclusion that it's really a very complementary tool if you're using ArcGIS for Server in your organizations or in your customer base. So I think with that, I'll just open the call up to just see if there's any immediate burning questions. So fire ahead if you've got any questions.